If you just scroll through international headlines on any given day, the sheer volume of global crises is, well, it's completely overwhelming. It really makes you wonder if the massive international frameworks we've spent decades building are actually doing anything at all. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're cutting right through all that noise to take a highly pragmatic, absolutely clear-eyed look at the global human rights project. The good, the bad, and the severely limited. We're going to dig into the source material to figure out exactly where this whole endeavor stands today and why it absolutely matters to the future of international relations.
So, let's just hit the cynicism head on, all right? With all the gross violations still happening around the world every single day, has the global human rights project actually failed? Have all these decades of treaties and fancy monitoring mechanisms actually changed state behavior? Or does this whole regime just serve as a depressing reminder of how much work we still have left to do? To answer that, we're going to break this down into 5 key areas: the Human Rights Project, the lawmaking reality, improving the institutions, the data deficit, and finally, changing global leadership. Let's kick things off with Section 1, the Human Rights Project. We need to start by looking closely at the major cracks in its foundation. Critics of this global regime, they make some incredibly strong points. They rightly point out that our global institutions are frequently pretty weak, and the monitoring processes often completely toothless because, let's face it, states are effectively grading their own homework through self-reporting. Plus, you've got pervasive double standards, and human rights are constantly being pushed aside to achieve other foreign policy goals. And the really tragic bottom line here is that despite this massive proliferation of treaties, persistent, horrific violations are still happening in literally dozens of countries. Some folks argue this giant legal project just distracts us from other paths, like global development. But our source material makes a crucial distinction. Yes, these are absolutely accurate criticisms, but they point to the limitations of the project, not reasons to just scrap the whole thing and walk away. Okay, moving right along to Section 2, the law-making reality. To truly push for social justice, we have to look at how the system actually functions in the real world, rather than how we wish it worked. There is a massive, and I mean massive, structural disconnect here. Think about it like this. At the international level, states get together and write the law. They negotiate treaties, they try to find consensus, and they want to avoid bias to get as many countries on board as humanly possible. But once the ink is dry and they sign those treaties, actually implementing them becomes a purely domestic issue. The whole system is built around sovereign states that hold on to near-exclusive authority to enforce these laws at home. So countries are totally fine acknowledging their international obligations on paper, but they fiercely resist any international enforcement that goes beyond simple, quiet monitoring. So we have to be realistic here. The choice we're facing isn't between some perfect, globally enforced human rights utopia and our current flawed system. No, the real choice is between a system of nationally implemented international obligations and absolutely nothing. Zip. Zero. Because even an unenforced obligation is still a legal obligation, right? When a state violates a law it actually agreed to, it changes the entire narrative of the victim's suffering. It alters the political reality of seeking justice. As our source so powerfully puts it, this clearly is not enough, but it is much more than nothing. Given that stark reality, let's look at Section 3, improving the institutions. We have to figure out how to renovate the architectural foundation we already have. Look, we don't need to invent brand new organizations from scratch. We just need to supercharge the ones we already have. Take the Universal Periodic Review. We've got to focus intensely on tracking whether its recommendations are actually making a difference at the local level. Then you have National Human Rights Institutions, or NHRIs. There are over 100 of these operating globally right now. If we put sustained international effort into boosting their budgets and their independence, that could drive massive incremental progress. And finally, we really need to empower NGOs to keep the pressure on. We need them to keep those informal conversations and that political pressure going long after the formal official reviews have wrapped up. But here's the catch. How do we actually know if optimizing these institutions is working? That brings us to Section 4, the data deficit. If you ask the fundamental question, are things globally getting better or worse for human rights? It reveals a really uncomfortable truth. We simply do not know for sure. I know, it sounds crazy, but to answer that definitively, we need global, comprehensive, reliable, empirical data tracking national trends over time. And right now, we just don't have it. It's not that we don't have any data. Honestly, we're kind of drowning in it. We've got the Freedom House Index looking at democracy, the Political Terror Scale measuring violence, the SURF Index tracking socioeconomic performance, the list goes on. But here's the problem. They all use completely different indicators and methodologies. It's like comparing apples to bicycles. Trying to cross-reference all of this to get one accurate global picture is an absolute nightmare. So, how do we fix it? The solution really boils down to one number: 12. Launched back in 2015, the Human Rights Measurement Initiative is stepping up to standardize all these metrics. They're doing this by zeroing in on 5 specific economic and social rights, think food and education, alongside 7 civil and political rights, like freedom of assembly. By standardizing the data collection for just these 12 areas, we might actually finally be able to compare country data accurately and measure real change over time. It's a total game changer. Furthermore, to truly understand what all this data means, we have to pull human rights out of its traditional silo. It can't just be this niche subfield of international law and politics. We have to mainstream it. That means incorporating the natural sciences, which, is obviously vital when you're talking about the right to health, as well as the humanities and broader social sciences. It's a team effort. Now, let's look at the horizon. Section 5, Changing Global Leadership. Let's explore the impending storm of geopolitical shifts. To really assess this whole regime, we have to look at who's actually steering the ship. And right now, the geopolitical winds are blowing aggressively against global cooperation. Experts are openly warning about the potential end of the liberal international order, which is being fueled by a sharp rise in nationalism and populism. We're seeing historically strong supporters in the global north actively downgrade their backing for human rights. There's been a notable departure from the post-Cold War consensus, like the shift we saw in the United States during the Trump administration's approach to human rights. The landscape is shifting under our feet, and this sparks a massive fundamental debate in international relations theory. On one side, you have political realism. Realists argue that international institutions basically just reflect the preferences of the superpowers that fund them. So if those great powers pull their support, the institutions crumble, period. But on the other side, you have institutionalism. Institutionalists argue that these established global regimes have a certain stickiness. The idea is that once they're built, they take on a life of their own. They can actually sustain themselves and keep influencing state behavior, even if the top-tier global leaders decide to walk away. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative thought. For human rights to survive these chaotic geopolitical winds, they absolutely need to be sticky. So ask yourself, has the global human rights regime fundamentally changed state identities? Have these norms become so deeply embedded in our international society that they've actually altered what countries fundamentally value? Or is this all just a temporary behavioral trend that's going to vanish the very second great power politics decide it's no longer convenient? I want you to think critically about that question as you read the international news this week. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the systems around you, and I will see you next time.